Good evening from the Gail Lemron Auditorium on the campus of Embry-Riddle. Welcome to the Embry-Riddle Speaker Series. I'm Marc Bernier, moderator for tonight's event. With an election in the next few weeks, early voting to start soon, there are a lot of questions about the safety of your vote during this Cybersecurity Awareness Month. So we thought in tonight's program we'd combine two great subjects. One of the most popular subjects we cover in this series is cybersecurity. We brought back our experts and added some new faces to the mix. So we'll cover cybersecurity threats and the sanctity and the safety of your vote. We do that now with our panel from the left to right. Dr. Gary Kessler is the professor of cybersecurity and the chair of security studies and international affairs here at Embry-Riddle. Dr. Philip Krieger is the associate professor of cybersecurity here at Embry-Riddle. Scott DeVault is from Florida Cyber Alliance. And Lisa Lewis is the election supervisor for Volusia County. Please, my friends, welcome my friends to tonight's panel. Well, let me start with you, Gary. With an election looming, and I'll skip right over to Lisa in a moment. Are there more cyber threats now than ever, or is this just another chapter in the cybersecurity threat?
Well, generically, of course, there are more cybersecurity threats than ever. The number of vulnerabilities go up, the number of exploits go up. When we talk specifically about the election, we've certainly seen a big evolution in the last 4 to 8 years of various actors impacting on elections in any number of countries. I think when it comes specifically to the election, and we've all talked about this a little bit, I think when people hear about security of the election, they all conjure up a slightly different image. I think for me, I try to differentiate between the security of the vote itself, and once we've actually put everything through our voting machines and all that, and the count, and then there is the hacking potential of databases. There is the hacking potential of the disinformation and misinformation campaigns that we've heard about impacting the way people vote in the first place. So I think the cybersecurity aspects of the election is a very, very broad field. And I suspect as we're talking about different aspects, we'll sort of focus on those different things as well.
We're going to go back and forth between those things in the election process and just everyday things like your banking. Let me come to Lisa. The big question, not to give the whole thing away, but people want to know, is my vote safe in Volusia?
Absolutely. We have put many, many measures in place, both on the cybersecurity end and the physical end for the safety of the ballots. In case you don't know, I come from banking, and in banking we protected money, and to me ballots are just like that. So there are two-factor, actually we have quadruple authentication to get into where you program the election, to where you test the machines, to where you even work with the ballots. It takes 2 people with 2 badges and 2 PIN numbers to get in there. So if you had a badge, you still could not get in without that PIN and someone else. So for programming, for testing all the equipment, for protecting the ballots when they are mailed out and coming back in, absolutely it's safe.
Is our system state of the art?
To me it is. Is there always room for improvement? Of course. We can always work on better equipment, better ways of doing things. So you always have to want to move up. I don't know that we'll ever be at the top. You want to strive for higher and higher safety, but we are safe.
The reason I ask is some longtime residents here have experienced, and you've worked in the office for a number of years under your predecessor. We've had things like ballots, paper ballots, boxes being left in a car, and things like that happening. We don't go through that now. We've got the scanners, they're read, and there have been few problems. Am I correct? You
are correct. And again, it's the physical security and measures we've put in place, where there are 2 people working with every aspect of the election. I think before, one person may have brought the equipment and the ballots back years ago. Now we have 2 people. We have a deputy that is there at the drop site where the equipment and ballots come back. A deputy and a county employee follows the trucks back to our office. There is always not just the truck driver, the poll workers, but employees and deputies that follow to make sure everything is brought back and is secure there in the office.
I took a phone call from a gentleman the other day who had moved from Tampa back to our area. And he said he was able to change his address and register over the phone.
Yes.
And it kind of startled me a little bit because I was thinking, oh, if somebody gets his phone or somebody can pretend is that a chancy method?
Well, there are questions that we ask to prove that
The
you
identity?
are, yes, absolutely. And since Florida is on a statewide voter registration database, we are able to move your registration from one county to another if you do move, just like he moved from Tampa to here. Now, when I say it's on a statewide voter registration database, we can pull up everyone around the state. However, every county maintains their own voter registration database. So there's not one single point of entry to be hacked.
Okay. One more issue, and I'm going to come back into cybersecurity and ask you. Recently, we had a senator who passed on, State Senator Dorothy Yukl. Days before her untimely death, she had announced she was not seeking re-election. We spoke on the phone. Her name was already on the ballot. Ballots were mailed out before the death certificate went to Tallahassee, acknowledging that she would not be on the ballot. So how is that going to be handled in the election? A vote for Dorothy is a vote for, in this case, Tom Wright?
Correct. I just, as a matter of fact, this afternoon received notification from the state that he had qualified. So now we will post notices at every polling location, every early voting site, and beginning tomorrow, any vote by mail that has that race on it will get a notice telling everyone that a vote for Dorothy L. Yukl will count as a vote for Tommy A. Wright.
And there'll be signs up at the polling places
Yes,
too?
in every voting booth, on the board going in, and we're putting them up at the office. It's on the website.
Okay. In general, I want to open this up to all three of you. Is voting in America safer in terms of the vote than it is in other countries? Or do other countries, from your experience in cybersecurity, have you heard anything that suggests anybody does it better than we do?
I'll defer to the people on my left.
I don't know a lot about
respect.
other countries, and it depends on what country you're talking about. There's a lot of
Canada.
countries.
England, France, Israel. I hear Israel does a real good job.
I would think
election.
Israel does, yes.
Yeah.
And there's really evolving threats because we've really changed the way that we've done this. I think you mentioned that we're now all paper ballots in the state of Florida. And in the last election, there were 30 states that at least had part of the voting process done with direct recording election voting systems, which meant everything was contained on the voting machine, so there was no paper audit. So if you needed to go back and do a recount of something, you would just go back and recount those votes that were on the machine. And so that was one of the things that the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine came out with in their paper, was that we need to go back first to paper ballots, which the state of Florida has done. The second thing is we need these paper audits and risk limiting auditing that you can do after the election to look at a statistical sample of the ballots to make sure that it kind of lines up with all the ballots, the total amount of ballots, so you could tell if there were any discrepancies in there. And if there were, you could go back and do a full recount. So I think that we're going in the right direction.
This is Cybersecurity Awareness Month. It's an opportunity for us to share with the general public some of the new things that we're learning and also take your questions. We're going to go to those questions in just a little bit. For Scott, a little bit about your experience as it works with cyber. You work for the United States government now, and you have several clients and several different things you do. You've even worked with the school system. You work with online. Tell us about your work.
Sure. Well, with Florida Cyber Alliance, one of the things that we're doing is we put on training camps for kids, the youth. We're involved with the Air Force Association's program for Cyber Patriot, which is a competition system that helps kids come together as a team, and they compete on how to defend computer hacks. And that's a really kind of a fun activity. It's a good way to learn. I know people are always concerned about their privacy. So what we're always trying to do is teach people about what they can do to help with the information that they have, that whether they're personal, date of birth, social security number, address, those sorts of things. And that obviously is something that's really concerning when it comes to vote. Is my voter registration information even secure? So,
You know, Embry-Riddle and Daytona State in this community have superior rankings from U.S. News and World Report for their online learning experience. But gentlemen, what's the chance of cheating online? Is the technology becoming better, or the programs becoming better? Is the methodology becoming better so there's less of a chance that students will cheat?
Let me ask my students, how easy is that? None of these students are online. And when I was at Daytona State, everything was online. There was the opportunity to cheat, but I had them actually write reports. And so they weren't taking a test. There wasn't something they could Google. They actually had to write and respond, and it was pretty easy to tell if somebody was cheating. Here we have something called Turnitin, which every student has to submit an assignment to this database that looks at millions of other papers that have been turned in. It will actually show where the same words have been used in all these other papers. So I think I think the technology is there, but you can't stop it completely.
Gary.
I think also, if I'm teaching a lecture with 200 students in it, which we don't do at Riddle, but if I was teaching a class with 200 students, I wouldn't necessarily know all the individual students, but I might be able to track people's writing, which becomes, unique like a fingerprint. And the same thing is true online. I will occasionally have a student who writes the most terrible emails and the most terrible discussion postings, and then turns in a paper worthy of a Pulitzer. Now, it may not show up in Turnitin because the paper may not be plagiarized. It may have been purchased. But I can sort of tell that after a while. You know who your students are, and particularly as they go from course to course. Most universities that have an online program go through a great effort to make sure that the student that's enrolling really is the person. And then after that, there's all sorts of ways, I suppose, to cheat, but it's not as easy as it might first appear.
What are the cyber threats to the election? Is it directing voters to one issue or candidate? Is it the hacking? What's the greatest cyber threats in general?
Well, you were talking before about the security of the elections, and there were a number of things that I was thinking of. Phil mentioned the paper ballots. Georgia, I believe, uses all electronic. Mm-hmm. And they've recently been sued by a number of plaintiffs to try to force them to go back to paper ballots because their electronic system had no paper audit. And I believe that the courts may have actually ordered them to go back and then realized it's impossible to do before the midterm elections. We've got the Secure Election Act, which is stuck right now in the Senate. It can't come out of committee because I guess the most diplomatic thing I can say is it suffers from a lack of bipartisan support. There was an election recently in the Republic of Macedonia about whether they should change their name to be the Republic of North Macedonia. I don't really care.
Is there a South Macedonia?
No, but apparently this is an issue with Greece. Macedonia and Greece have been in conflict over the name because there's a portion of Greece that uses the name Macedonia, and if the country of Macedonia changes their name to North Macedonia, everybody walks away and they all feel good about themselves. And meanwhile, there was a large body of work right now that believes that the Russians invoked themselves in trying to basically get the people in Macedonia to not change the name because they came up with all sorts of reasons why people shouldn't change the name. And I guess the point is that what the Macedonians do is, as far as I'm concerned, up to them, but external factors should not be coming in trying to sway what they do. Much like, we have a lot of reports about external forces giving, again, misinformation, disinformation campaigns within our own election in the past. And, this whole idea of affecting other countries' elections, and we're guilty of this as well. But this is, I think, in a lot of ways, the biggest concern that I have in the impact of the election. I believe that the votes are safe. Certainly the places that are using paper. And hopefully we've gotten away from hanging chads. But, I believe that the machines can, count a piece of paper that's been marked. And the fact that we have an audit trail, we can actually prove, that this was the count. So that's not my big concern, particularly in Florida. My concern is how the electorate is being affected by forces outside.
Who's affecting them? Is it North Korea? Is it Russia? China? All three?
Keep going. I mean, really? It could be anybody. But certainly, The Russians have the track record. I think that in this country we have not recognized the cyber threat of the North Koreans, that in my mind is way worse than their nuclear threat. I think that the cyber threat of the North Koreans, they have a dozen-year track record of hacking in this country.
I'm thinking while you were speaking about, Scott, do you want to pick up on that?
Yeah, sure. Just to kind of further go on the cyber threat aspect, I would say that when we're talking about Russia, for example, and people were concerned about Russia for Trump or Russia for Clinton, it was really more about disruption. Mm-hmm. So if the Russians can affect the stabilization of our voting process, then they can disrupt the process. They can really get a big win. So they didn't really care who won, I believe. I think they were really working towards just making a big mess of things.
I just want to stop. Can everyone hear our guests? Yeah. Okay, just checking in, because they're soft-spoken, because they're shy. You're going to see these guys when they're out of the classroom. Listening to all of this, I have to wonder about the way the checks and balance. You do a lot of checking with the equipment. Every machine is checked. Lisa, take us through, for the benefit of this audience, what you do to make sure you have the best possible efficiency of these machines.
Sure. Matter of fact, right now, as we speak, the last week and this week, we are doing 100% testing of every piece of equipment we have. That's the equipment where you go to check in and they check your registration, the tabulating equipment, the express votes that some of our special needs voters vote on. Everything is tested. Whether we're going to use it or not, it is tested. Once that testing is complete, Monday, as a matter of fact, October 22nd at 9 a.m., it's open to the public, we have a public logic and accuracy testing where the canvassing board then chooses randomly 10 units to be tested in the public to make sure that they work, that they come up with the correct results from the ballots that are tabulated. And when I say random, if there's members of the public there, the canvassing board lets them choose. No one can say that we choose what is to be tested. So those are all tested. Once the election has come and gone, that night, all the results are in. After it's certified, we then do a manual audit, which again is randomly chosen. And it's in the public, and the canvassing board allows a member of the public. We had one member after at the canvassing board meeting in the primary election. He got to choose the race. He got to choose the precincts that were within that race to be manually counted. So all the ballots that were actually counted on election night, vote by mail and early voting, are then counted by hand to make sure that those results are the same as what came through on election night.
When someone shows up at a polling place, like there'll be early voting beginning on the 27th, are the ballots actually printed on location? Someone told me that they print the ballot right there. When
At
you
early
show your
voting, we
ID.
do, yes.
Really?
Early voting is ballot on demand printing.
There was a story that came out a couple of weeks ago that suggested at one polling place they didn't have the right ballots. Was that true, or was that urban legend?
Well, they had the right ballots. It is at times not paying attention to what ballot is given out so that the voter may not get the correct ballot.
Okay, so it wasn't.
And let me, can I say something
Yeah,
here
please.
in public? I would love everyone to make sure that they check when they go in to vote, whether it be early voting or at your polling location. When you check in at what we call the EVID, which is an electronic voter identification system, it prints a ticket once you're verified. And at the top of that ticket, the first thing it says is voting pass. The second thing is ballot style. So when you see that number on that ballot style, that should match the ballot that the poll worker hands you, so you know you are getting the correct ballot style. And I've told more people, you're allowed to ask, let me see that. Let me see I'm getting the correct ballot. And another thing, we mail out sample ballots. Take it with you. Compare it to what they're giving you to make sure it's the exact same ballot that you should be getting and voting on.
There are 12 constitutional amendments on the ballot, am I correct?
Correct.
And that includes the one that was taken out. There was one that was taken out. Was
Yeah, there would have
13?
been 13, right?
So you have 12. How many of you understand all the constitutional questions? All lines coming up, boy. I know this is not a Lisa Lewis question, but I got to ask you. Shouldn't the legislature remedy this so we have one question and not, have three in one? Can you give an opinion? Are you allowed to opine?
Well, I will just tell you what it is, the law. It is supposed to be one subject per question, with the exception of the Constitution Revision Commission. They can bundle.
Maybe we need a constitutional amendment that we can't bundle the constitutional questions.
Yes.
I like that idea.
And what happens, somebody said this to me the other day, and it's pretty true, that they meet every 20 years. So by the time, we're all fussing that they bundled now, and in 20 years when they meet again, we have forgotten about it. So nothing is done every 20 years.
All right, next, an oldie but a goodie. Passwords. I know you guys hate this, but I got to ask you for the benefit of the audience. What's the best way for someone to protect their identity with their password? Should they use phraseology? Should they use more numbers, more symbols? Or should they use the double pump like we have?
Both.
Jump
The
ball.
longer
Anybody
better,
jump
the
in?
more complex, the better.
Right.
Longer is better than complex.
And one password per account. If you have 400 accounts, each should have their own password.
Don't use words.
Don't use phrases in the dictionary, no matter how long they are. Anti-disestablishmentarianism, that's not a good password
be
because
found.
that's in the English language dictionary.
Oh, wow.
So, to follow up what Phil said, so I have my 400 accounts and my 400 passwords, which I will never remember. So I use some software called Password Safe. All my passwords are in the password safe. So all I really need to do is remember one password, the one that gets me into my password safe. You use a different method.
I use LastPass.
And I use
it's-
LastPass as well.
Yeah, and it's an add-in, it's a free to your browser. And it not only will it keep those passwords secure, it will also automatically generate passwords of any length and complexity you like. And they could be that long, very complex, you don't have to remember. As Gary said, you just have to remember your master password for your password manager.
Do you recommend changing passwords every 3 months, every 6 months? How often? Does it depend on how much you go online? Does it depend on whether you're paying your bills online? How often do you recommend?
I think there have been all sorts of studies that are suggesting that it doesn't matter whether you
doesn't
change
matter.
passwords or not.
Okay.
I mean,
As long as they're long and complex.
Yeah, as long as they're long and complex. I mean, if somebody gets into the database that stores your password, usually it's stored in some sort of encrypted form, but if they get into the password database, well, they're going to get your password anyway. If they somehow are able to put a keystroke logger on your computer, which is a keystroke logger's software generally, that actually monitors everything you type, then it doesn't matter how long and complex your password is, because they're going to see what you type and they'll get it that way. But we've even had discussions here at Riddle. At Riddle, we change them every 90 days? I forget. But we change them periodically. And we've been having discussions with the IT folks saying, did you read this study that says we don't need to change our passwords? And they're even saying, yeah, well, we're looking at that.
I think if you change them more often, what happens is people figure out ways to cheat the system.
Right.
They just change one character.
Right.
And that doesn't really work very effectively.
Right.
So I think the best recommendation for people is to have a different password for every account.
Yeah.
Use a password manager if you can, or figure out a way to record them.
Yeah, I mean, to Scott's point, people will have a password like, banana 10. And next month, they'll change it to banana 11.
Yeah.
And the month after that. So it turns out that effectively, I really only had one password, and I was never changing it anyway, because somebody can figure out the pattern.
So may I shame my students?
Yes.
Okay, so I've asked all my students in classes every semester, how many distinct passwords do you have for all your accounts? You know what the average is?
1.
3.
Oh, no.
3?
3.
Not enough.
No, well, if you had 3
Three
accounts, but
accounts.
I'm assuming they have much more than 3
They only
accounts,
have
right?
3.
But I try to scare the bejesus out of them and tell them, all the different things that could happen to them, and I think that perhaps some of them are coming around.
Okay, before I go to Lisa Lewis, I want to ask the three of you about Google. Today we received information from listeners that said, I'm coming off Google. They can track everything I do. I'm going to, for my search engine, use, GoDuckGo or something?
DuckDuckGo.
Yeah,
DuckDuckGo, because it's safer. Gentlemen, is it safer?
Or
That
it
safe-
provides more privacy.
More privacy,
They
that's
don't
what they
track
mean by
you as
safe.
much, yes.
They don't track you as much, but they still track you. Really? Okay, I believe you guys. You're the experts because
I've not done any analysis on DuckDuckGo.
Yeah.
I mean, whatever it's called, but I have heard that it is safer.
yes.
Yeah, but we only have DuckDuckGo's word for it.
Well, this was in response.
Oh,
This was in response to a listener who said that Google Chrome may move faster for me, but they can track everything I'm doing, and I'm getting these ridiculous pop-ups. If I even do a search at Amazon, I'm looking for a pair of sunglasses I want, I'm going to get bombed with ads. Is there any way to avoid that? How many of you have had that happen? You just look for something, and suddenly they're following you. What about that?
There's a way around that. Use
There
a
is.
ad blocker.
Use ad blocker?
Yeah, well, even if you're using Google, they're still tracking you, but if you don't want to see the ads, then use an ad blocker. A lot of malware is served through ads.
Okay. And if you read newspapers online, depending on what it is, you often have to look at ads before you get the story. This is not a knock on the news journal. I use it as a resource every day, but I get tired of waiting for everything to open up before I can move the story. Does that happen with other people? Yeah. See? It's only going to get worse.
I have a
isn't it?
subscription. That's why I don't get the ads.
Yeah. Well, there you go.
Yeah, well, I was wondering why I didn't have that common experience. No, Google's a problem because Google owns your email, so they'll read it and put it together with your searches so that you have a better experience. Experience was in quotes. I hate to use air quotes. There's no question that Google is tracking your searches. Chrome was actually, from a security viewpoint, was always an awful browser. Chrome had more security problems than Internet Explorer. And yeah, it was in that regard never a really great browser in my opinion, and from everything I read about it. But yeah, there's a problem with it tracking you and all of us being commodities.
Lisa, do you have to offer special coursework for your people? Do you have to change passwords to maintain your security level to protect the information you have?
We do change our passwords. Most people, really it's one password to get into our computer. That's really what most of the employees have, is just to sign on in the morning. We don't necessarily, most of them do not get into like program the election or going into one of our other databases that we have. Only a select few are allowed into those. So they have different passwords and do change those.
Medical information is becoming increasingly more security conscious. If you go for a physical, you go for blood test, it used to be you called your doctor, came in, and they would read the results. Now you have a portal that you log into. And I'm wondering, is that become complex? Are people, from what you can tell, from what you're hearing, are people able to work this without too much difficulty? I have not done it yet. Gary?
I've been using, well, every doctor I go to down here, from the dentist to my doctor to my eye doctor to my dermatologist, everybody gives me access to a portal. The portals appear to be very secure. I haven't heard about there being any specific problems with that part of the software. Usually the break-ins are not, somebody logging in and stealing stuff through the front door. Usually they're getting in a back way if they're going to be stealing databases. But the portals themselves I found to be, very reasonably secure. Almost so locked down that they're restrictive. I would like to send an email to my doctor, more simply than I do, but there's a process.
Okay, additional viewpoints here?
With the doctors, you don't know what they're doing with their security. So if they're storing stuff online for your information, that's where I'd be most concerned. So when you come to one system, maybe this overall security would be better. I'm more concerned with all the different doctors having the same information and not having any expertise on security or any techniques for security.
How many in our audience have heard of crypto coins or crypto? Show of hands? Okay, will this be the coin of the realm in the future on the internet?
Well, on some places of the internet it is already. I don't see it being the coin of the realm because it's not really backed up by anything except people's faith. And I've had any number of people. I have a relative actually who trades in Bitcoin, and his comment to me once was, well, the dollar works only because we all have faith in it. And I observed, well, the dollar works because we have faith in it, and it's backed by the U.S. Army. Bitcoin, yeah, we have faith in it, but if anybody's been watching Bitcoin recently, it's been dropping through the floor. After, last year starting at 200, ending at 19,000, and now it's been, dropping crazily. There's no rhyme or reason to the value of those currencies. So I don't see it happening in the near future that would
And
be.
anybody can make one of these.
Well, that's true.
Anybody can come up with their own cryptocurrency.
That's true.
And they come and they go, and
Yeah.
Bitcoin's been around a while,
Yeah.
Ethereum's around a while. When you can come out with your own currency, there's probably something wrong with it.
Yeah, I was going to say, by the end of this show, if you wanted, we could have,
could have our own.
Bernier coin. And,
People can get really confused when you talk about valuating cryptocurrency. When I invest in General Electric or Ford or Google or whatever, I can value with that company. It has assets, it has a certain amount of money that it brings in every quarter. Bitcoin, there's no way to value it. So it's very dangerous, I think.
Let's talk about the dark web. Today in the Daytona Beach News Journal, there was a story about the dark web. Last week, Sheriff Mike Chitwood told us and described it this way, gentlemen, you may have an additional viewpoint, that the internet that we use is only the tip of the iceberg, that below that is much more, and it's the dark web, and that's where much crime is happening. What we learned from the sheriff in his initial discussion was that it's not only drug trade, it's the buying and selling of hot items, so fencing, plus elderly abuse happens. People get taken on the dark web. Can people be victimized if they're not operating on the dark web? If our folks here haven't logged in to something on the dark web, they could be approached, though, from the dark web, correct or not?
well, let me provide a different
Yeah,
idea of what the
please.
dark web is. So everybody's familiar with the internet, right? And you can go to, www.bernier.com, and, you can get to web servers.
Building my own empire now.
We are, because you got coin, you got a web server, so we're on our way. So the dark web is actually still using the same servers that all of us know how to use. They're just using a different set of protocols in how we get there. And you need to have a special browser called the Tor browser, and that we use a special protocol called Tor. But we're still using all the same web protocols on top of Tor to be able to, get where it is we want to go. I'm unfamiliar and unaware of people abusing the elderly on the dark web. And it's not like somebody can reach out from the dark web and get you. The only way you interact with people on the dark web is, in fact, to be using the Tor browser and interact. However, he is correct to the extent that if you want to engage in any illegal activity, from the exchange of child pornography, the exchange of illegal drugs, the exchange of guns, the trafficking of people, all of that is taking place, or does take place on the dark web in a variety of marketplaces. I have a number of students that are working with me on doing dark web for a company that we're working for, where what they're trying to do is use the dark web to get essentially open source intelligence about their own customers. So they may have a customer in the shipping line. Well, they want to know, are there threats on the dark web against shipping lines in general, this shipping line in particular, the board of trustees of this shipping line, whatever. And we've occasionally stumbled upon elements of criminality while we're doing that. We had one student who accidentally stumbled upon an assassination site. And it's real easy for me to put out my shingle on the dark web and say, I'm an assassin, I will kill people for you, just give me $50,000 and I'll get it done. And it's equally easy to, some important person dies in a traffic accident. So I post a picture on my website and say, I was responsible for the traffic accident. So obviously I can kill other people as well. Well, she stumbled upon a site that had 6 victims. 5 were in the past, 1 was in the future. So we actually got that to law enforcement, who determined that we had tripped upon, totally by accident, a credible threat. That happens occasionally. Because, like I said, my students aren't looking for criminality. But if you're looking for criminality, there's plenty of it to be found on the dark web. One of the problems with the dark web is the Tor protocol is designed for anonymity, cryptocurrencies, which is the coin of the realm on the dark web, is designed for anonymity. And so it's very, very hard to track people down, although it can be done.
These people that get these emails that say, you are so-and-so and your password, and I know where you've been online, people get...
I got 2 of those last week.
Right.
They're not emulating from the dark web, they're emulating from above the dark web?
Well, yeah, they're sending out the emails on the surface web, or the
Yes.
internet. They might have purchased or obtained those old user account login credentials from the dark web. Now what they're doing is they're trying to use social engineering to get you to do something because they're trying to demonstrate that, hey, we've got information on you, and that's quite common. And what they end up doing is they could send out, buy a list of 100,000 accounts and send them all out. And it's not like robbing a bank. If you have to rob a bank. Here you're just shotgunning out to 100,000 people. And if 10 end up paying you $1,000, you've made money off of, very little investment.
I want to come back to Scott and ask, does the Florida Cyber Alliance ever try to police any of this? Does that ever come into your purview at all?
No, but we are involved in the training aspect, so I'll kind of talk a little bit more about this subject with the dark web, and that is sometimes we'll have a kid that says, hey, I want to watch this show, and I don't want to pay for it. So can you help me out? And so one of their friends will give them a list of instructions that says, yeah, download this Tor, the Onion router, and follow these instructions to set up these special protocols, and voila, you can watch Game of Thrones for free. So meanwhile, what happens is they're also downloading malware. And so now they've just opened up their computer to be used by anybody in the dark web. There's a lot more things that go into it, but when you start following these lack of integrity issues, you just opened yourself up. So yeah, there is a risk.
We're going to go to questions in just a moment. If you have a question on any of this, as we go back and forth between elections and cybersecurity, feel free. We'll take your questions right here at the end on either side. We have our 2 students, Diego and Sandus, to help you, and just speak directly into the microphone. We'll take students first. If you want to make your way down right now, we'll start interweaving your questions on this subject. Banking is a big issue. A lot of people bank online. Is it becoming more dangerous, gentlemen? Or are people becoming more sophisticated in understanding the dangers that are out there of doing commerce online?
I think that, well, for individuals, I haven't seen, I'm looking to you guys to see if you're going to shake your heads. I mean, for individuals going, again, to a portal to go to their bank, I haven't seen there being a lot of problems. I've been seeing other problems with hacking into ATM machines that are using old operating systems. There have been other attacks.
You mentioned that at our meeting, that some of these banks have very old software.
Well, Windows XP, which was end of life, was like in April of 2014, is used widely by ATMs. Microsoft knows that, and Microsoft has special arrangement for the embedded XP systems in ATMs to continue putting out patches and all that, but it's still a very old operating system. But we've seen that in a lot of places where old operating systems continue to be used in any number of industries because it's too expensive to upgrade the software that's running on top of, that wouldn't run on a new operating system. But banking itself, the finance industry is probably the number 2 target of hackers right now. But they're usually going in for hacking the banks themselves and getting into the big databases because that's where the money is, as opposed to trying to get into my account or your account or anything like that.
I want to come back to elections and ask you, Lisa, when the polls close at 7 on election night, we can watch, anybody can watch by going to ValuaCounty.org or
ValuaElections.org.
ValuaElections.org, and they'll see what looks like a sample ballot that comes up, and then we wait for numbers to come. Those first numbers that come, are they precinct numbers? Are they absentee ballots? What's coming first?
Actually, vote by mail and early voting results are the first.
Those are the first reports that come out.
And those are the vote by mail as of the Monday before, Monday night. It does not include Tuesday's numbers yet, as we're still tabulating that day. So your first numbers you see will be vote by mail and early voting results.
And then it works by precinct or
And
the
then
amount
as
of
the precincts coming in, and they're all over the board, it's whoever gets theirs uploaded first. They'll just keep coming in all night.
Last, at the primary, we were pretty well done by a little after 8 o'clock, but then we found that it wasn't what we decided or what we thought was happening because there were numbers that came in from across the state, which is why the primary went the way it did.
Correct.
Is it more complicated because of the fact we have the time zone change up in the Panhandle? You can't declare a victor until you know how many votes are out there from the other time zone.
Correct. And then, depending on the elections and the poll workers and the other counties, how, I hate to say slow, but how they are coming in. And Volusia County used to be a slower county, but we have, knock on wood, the last 3 elections since we've purchased this new equipment, we have had all our results in. 8:54 was the latest, and that was 2016 general election that we had all our results in. So I'm very pleased with how we've been doing.
Okay, what triggers a recount?
If it is half of 1% or less, it's a
That separates the two top
that separates
finishers?
the two. It is a machine recount. If it's 1/4% or less, then it's a manual recount. And when we say manual recount, a lot of people do not know this. In Florida, a manual recount is just doing a machine recount first, which separates the overs and unders votes. And an undervote is somebody who didn't vote in that race in question, and an overvote is somebody marked 2 people or 2 answers, and so then it's an overvote. So it kicks those out, and those are looked at manually to see if anything may be questionable with it. It's presented to the canvassing board if it is, and they make the decision on whether or not it should count.
Do you have redundancy in place so that if something were to happen to a machine and its numbers, that it wouldn't disappear and say, oh my goodness, we lost everything from this machine? Do you have redundancy in place?
Yes, there's actually a backup media within each machine so that the results are going on both. So the first one is what is actually uploading, and we have the second one as a backup. And remember, in Florida, we have the paper.
What happens if there's a power failure? Do you have backups so that
There
you don't
are
have
battery
interruption?
backups on each of the units, so they are charging all day that they're plugged in. We charge them before they go out, they're charging all day while they're plugged in. So they have a little bit of life on them. If we see it's gonna be, a little while, then we have a generator that we could get out there, or if we need to, you can turn it off in between voters if there's not many, and then turn it back on when they come to put the ballot in.
This question comes up all the time. What's to stop a person from voting in 2 states? Somebody who came from Oklahoma decided to vote here, but also voted in Oklahoma. Are we working as a nation toward a national system so that you can tell, wait a minute, they already voted. They voted in Missouri.
There are people that are registered. We have snowbirds that come down and they may be registered up in a state up north or out west and then come here and are registered here. However, if they don't put on their registration here in Florida where they last registered, then we can't tell that state they are now with us. However, Florida joined last year legislatively, chose to join ERIC, which is an electronic registration information sharing group. So there are 22 states, Florida should be 23 or 24 because I think another one joined, that we are going to join as of January 1st. That way we can check other states, at least the 24 that are in there, to see if there are other registrations. Now when it comes to voting twice, it's in a presidential year that you would be voting twice for one person or a race, that being the president, because that is the only one that is on every state ballot. Everything else is particular to that state.
All right, I'm going to leave the elections for a bit because there was a question that a member of the audience asked if we would get into it. We've seen these ads on television for wireless technology, keyless entry, ways to check your home, to make sure your lights are on, or to lock or unlock things. how hackable in general are these types of systems? Jump ball for anybody to jump in on this.
Well, it depends on the system. There's a particular maker of IP cameras. The manufacturers in China, and they just have a white box, and then they sell it to other companies, and then they put their own label on them. And those had hard-coded credentials, administrator password. Hard-coded means you can't change those. And the issue is, if somebody can find those, they can hack into those systems and then take control of them, because all the little IP cameras are small little computers. And one of the largest and most devastating cyber attacks occurred because people were taking over these Internet of Things devices and pointing them to attack various organizations.
Ooh.
So on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being the highest, I'd put their hackability to 12. There's online the hacked Internet of Things database. And that database is constantly being added with devices such as the one that Phil describes. Somebody figures out how to hack it, they go to the hacked IoT database, and they add the credential list. So many of the Internet of Things devices have hard-coded usernames and passwords that are not user changeable, not user configurable. That and most people don't change their username and password anyway when they buy these devices. There's places to go online where you can find all the defaults, and it makes them eminently attackable.
Yeah.
Here's one for the students. How would you like to be in a situation where your parents can at any time see if you're sitting in your seat in your class? We know of a school, it's not very far from here, it's in the private sector, and they have cameras in every classroom, and the parents have codes. They can log in to make sure their offspring is attending class.
At university level?
Not quite.
Okay.
But it's in the private sector, and it's a private school, and it's not very far from here. I was kind of surprised to hear that, but apparently with worldwide students and parents that may be in Africa or Australia, they kind of want to know what's going on. What do you think of that, gentlemen? Any opinions?
That makes me concerned with a privacy issue. When we get our pictures taken, we often have to sign a release saying we allow somebody to take a picture of us, but we're allowing other parents to see a picture of my child in a classroom at any given time. I don't like it.
Yeah, I don't know all the specifics, but it seems to be working so far. But you've just opened the door for some challenges there. Unless everybody coming in knows that they're going to just know.
Signs off on that.
Yeah, it signs off on that. Because if they don't sign off on it and everybody else, then you got a real problem. So.
You have the one student that doesn't sign off. You're going to gray them out?
Yeah. So how would you feel if you had your parents being able to check on you anyway that way? So, all right, let's take questions. Let's come to our microphones, general public as well as students. If you have a question about cybersecurity, something specific, step right up, ask your question, and get it answered by the experts. We have 3 cybersecurity experts and an election supervisor who's a veteran of the business. If you would, tell us your first name, your field of study, your year of study. Thank you for being with us. Right into the microphone.
My name is Bradley Stewart, Homeland Security major, senior year. Question is, for a state like Georgia that you're saying still has all electronic ballots, does it seem more likely that the results would be hacked, changed, or perhaps held for a ransom, like the city of Atlanta was last year, where parts of the sector, or we see at hospitals often, where their information is held for a ransom? Would it be more likely that that would happen, or are the results changed?
Ransom or change? I can't see him being held by ransom, can you?
I don't think that ransom is the most likely scenario. I don't know that I would go so far as to say that it's more likely that something could happen in Georgia as much as it's more possible that something could happen. I don't know that being all electronic is now attracting people to try to do something there, but it's going to be way more possible there than it's going to be here in Florida.
When we talk about data protection, either data at rest or data in transit, clearly states that have all electronic election systems have a higher probability. I don't know if probability is the right probability of risk there, but a state like Florida, which I'm very proud to say has paper ballots. That's exciting for me because I feel like my vote will eventually get counted if it doesn't get counted right the first
Accurately,
time.
yes.
But I have good confidence that it's counted right the first time.
To the left now, your question, right into the microphone.
Hi, David. I'm studying Homeland Security, and I'm a sophomore in the major. With regards to Hurricane Michael and how it affected more up towards the Panhandle, do you think that, given its closeness to the midterms elections, that it could potentially affect the vote because not everyone might be able to have access to voting, or they might have more important things to worry about, like if they just lost their house, they're obviously going to be more prioritized with that. Do you think that could affect the election overall, like in both their capacity to be able to vote and the local area's ability to record the vote? And could that have an effect on the overall election of, say, our new governor or something like that?
I would say it does have a chance of affecting it, not so much with the equipment, because we have heard from the different supervisors that most of their offices came through unscathed. Their equipment is fine. They are without power. They are on generators. The next step, though, is looking at their polling locations to see how many of them may have survived or are inhabitable to host the elections and getting through. As we have seen here in Florida, a lot can be done in 3 weeks, cleanup time, and cleaning roadways and whatnot. And I know they have extra power crews, and our sheriff just sent 20 deputies there to help. So I do feel it will have an effect. I have actually had a couple that evacuated here to DeLand. They had relatives, or to DeLand and had relatives, and in his evacuation, they forgot to grab their vote by mail ballots. So now they're wondering how are they going to get to vote, because it's going to be, they're telling them 30 days before they can get back to Tyndall Air Force Base, as a matter of fact. So I am checking with the state to see what we can do maybe to help them. And if they are temporarily residing here, they can technically change their address to here and vote. They just, won't have their city or county elections for up there, but at least they will have the governor, which would be on their ballot anyway. So that is something that could be done.
I have a question. Since we do, for the early elections, we get the just-in-time printing of a ballot, is it theoretically possible that one county could print another county's ballot?
Yes, if we had their
Appropriate authorization and all
yes.
that kind of stuff.
with the programming and things.
What are you thinking, Gary?
Well, I'm thinking
And-
that, in fact, if you had displaced people in a different county and appropriate safeguards in place, blah, 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 that a different county could actually print out ballots.
You would set them up separate.
Very good.
Thank you.
Come over here and your question.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Jake. I'm aviation maintenance science. This kind of goes back to the devices like the security cameras. What about devices that have been alleged to gather data as you speak in your house, like say the Amazon Alexa? What kind of information does that gather? What is that used for, and how could that affect my vote? Say, I say in my house to my girlfriend or my wife, I voted for this person. Does that get into voter integrity?
Are you talking about Alexa and Google Home?
Yes.
Yes.
How's it related to an election?
Well,
We're trying to figure out how that ties to the election.
well,
Are
I
they
don't-
gathering the information that they hear
Yeah.
you talking about in
Oh,
your
wow.
home?
Like listening
Yeah.
to entire conversations.
Right.
Yes.
So allegedly, I think this is the case, that the device is only activated when it hears that activation word. That's all the research I've done, that is a
But-
true statement, although there has been cases where that has not necessarily been the case.
Yeah, I mean, the problem, we've seen this with some smart TVs, is the fact that the device is always listening.
Right.
It's always listening for the activation word, but presumably that means it could always be listening. And again, they had this with some of the TVs, that they were, waiting for commands, but they were also, keeping track of conversations.
So if there's a vulnerability, it
Yep.
could actually be used against us. in a
Yeah,
sense.
absolutely. How it can affect the election, I'm sure we could come up with a scenario. I can't think of one offhand.
What a lovely thought.
But on the other hand, where it can impact is the integrity of the Australian ballot. I mean, we have a secret ballot here, but when you go home and you tell your girlfriend or your wife or whoever, this is who I voted for, well, now that just became public information. Whereas you didn't mean it to be. It's not like you wrote a letter to the editor. outing yourself. In this case, you thought you were having a private conversation that just became, I mean, that's one thing that leaps to my mind.
Do you have Alexa?
Absolutely not. You kidding? After what I've said?
Any of you
Yes,
have?
yes.
You do?
And it's unplugged.
But I can plug it back in.
Let's come over here. Your question now. Good evening.
All right, I'm Paul. I'm a Homeland Security major, and I'm a freshman. And my question is going back to the dark web. What do you think needs to happen, not only at the county and state, but most importantly, national level, to educate people about the threats that are out there? I know personally, I've known about the dark web for a while, but it seems like it's just become a public topic recently. So do you think that is either going to be legislation, or is it going to be like a campaign, like information programs?
Well, I'm not sure what I would do at any of the legislative levels. I mean, you're not going to be able to outlaw it. And of course, we're still trying to figure out net neutrality, so I don't see that level at the legislature trying to figure out what to do about the dark web. I think most people don't worry about the dark web because it doesn't affect them directly personally, because they're not using it. And so, the emails that Phil was talking about earlier, because like I said, I got 2 of them this week. We know what you did, and here's an old password, and you have 24 hours in which to, pay us. I think one wanted $900, the other one is $6,000 or something like that. That's still happening on the surface web, and I don't even know that it came from the dark web. Most people won't know that. So I'm not exactly sure how we would address that. Law enforcement at all levels is certainly engaged. I mean, we now know about it with Volusia County, but I used to do work with the law enforcement in Vermont. We were already looking at the dark web 6, 7, 8 years ago. The feds have been looking at the dark web for the longest time. And it's almost a matter of whack-a-mole, finding somebody that you can actually catch.
Who created the dark web?
The U.S. Navy.
The United States Navy?
U.S. Navy developed Tor, there's something called the Onion Router, because the problem was I have people in, let's say, a country not necessarily friendly to the United States. Well, somebody didn't need to know what they were saying to me. They could merely track the traffic and know that it was coming to me from inside their country. And what Tor does is it totally obscures the route of the traffic. It also encrypts it. Well, then they gave it to MIT for civilian development, and now it's pretty much everywhere.
Wow. Over here, your question. Good evening.
Good evening. My name is Ronnie Williams. I'm aeronautical science, and I'm a sophomore. And I saw a picture of Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg, and I noticed in the background he had a piece of black tape covering his laptop face camera. And I was wondering, what are your guys' thought on people who will hack computers to look through the cameras of the laptop? And if that does happen, what is the likelihood of that happening to just general people like us?
Well, I personally have tape over all my cameras on my laptops and on my iMacs. And there is software that you can go out and purchase on the dark web that you can actually use to make sure that once installed, it will actually record, or they can see what's going on. Also, a particular organization called the CIA also had some of that software that would run on things like smart TVs and laptops and things like that. I don't think that the average user is going to be subject to that type of threat. I think those are more targeted things, like Mark Zuckerberg, like people in the intelligence community, like politicians. But I think just an average person, there's not a lot to get out of that.
Let's come over here. Sir, do you have a question?
Yeah, I got 2. One, I just switched doctors. I went to the new doctor, and I gave him, we were talking about my health, and he questioned me and left the room for 20 minutes, and he came back, and he said, no, that medication's wrong. You're supposed to be taking this many milligrams. And I'm like, no, I take this many milligrams. No, I have it. And we got into an argument. In 20 minutes, he could find out. And then he brought up a couple surgeries I forgot to put down and stuff. That fast, he had my whole medical history. But is that like a private thing for doctors to handle, or is that a?
As long as you're giving your doctors permission to collaborate that information, I
Oh,
think that's fine.
Yeah, I didn't care. I just was like, how could he come up with all this? So, you know.
Because they have a back door to
20
get in
minutes.
once you've given that permission. Is that it, Scott?
Well, they just have access.
Yeah. They have access to your
Yeah.
information, sir.
Well, just surprising. Everybody seems to have
Yeah,
access.
I wouldn't quite call it a backdoor, because backdoor to me is a little bit more nefarious. But indeed, the databases are in fact communicating.
They're all communicating.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're in the other, I'll let the young man, and I'll come back if
We'll
he's-
come back to you
if
for
we
the
have-
second question. Good evening, thank you. Please,
Thanks.
your name and your field of study right into the microphone.
All right, I'm Stephen McCullough, Homeland Security, sophomore. So, you know, the IoT devices are becoming increasingly popular, stuff like Amazon Alexa, Google Home, etc., the Facebook webcam recently. So something I don't understand is like why people are okay with being surveilled like that, because to me it just seems like glorified spyware. So
I think it's a balance of convenience. People think it's convenient, it's cool, and they don't worry about the potential bad effect, because why would anybody come after me? And I don't know that anybody is coming after any one of us, but I think they will go after sites that are susceptible. And to me, it's just a potential opening to be susceptible. But it's all a matter of convenience. We're constantly balancing. I'll give up a little bit of security because it's easier for me.
great.
Thank you. Yes, sir, your question.
Name first.
Go ahead, sir.
My name is John Lynch, and I understand that some Chinese companies are manufacturing computers that have installed devices where they can actually hack easily into the computer. What's being done to detect that and to eradicate it?
Well, not enough is probably not a good answer. I don't know that a lot is.
I've also read some interesting articles recently of the rice-sized piece of the chip that's in motherboards. It does become a supply chain problem. So you take, for an example, the Department of State purchases election equipment and it has this device. What is the Department of State doing in order to test that motherboard to make sure that those devices aren't installed? What is the Department of Defense doing? What is our, what is anybody doing to that regard? But I've also read articles that say it's not true, that they've done further testing, and the item that they're seeing is not a hacking device. It's not hardware that helps anybody send messages in and out of the network. So I think the story's still out. I'm not sure that we really know what it is yet.
Well, what I heard that there was a company that was identified by name.
Supermicro.
So that's not just a theory.
And that was in 2015, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
It's not just a theory.
I think one of the problems is that, and again, it is a little bit of a supply chain issue. The Department of State wants us, let's say, to buy American. So I'm an American company and I design something and I've got the blueprint and everything. And what happens is when we send the blueprint out for manufacturing, we get a device, we don't check the device to the blueprint, we do functional testing. So about 15 or 20 years ago, there were keyboards being made by Dell, distributed by Dell, and they did all the right functional tests that you would do. I press an A on the keyboard and A appears on the screen, this keyboard works. Well, what they didn't know is that the keyboard had also a keystroke logger in it. And of course, as soon as you plug the thing in and the computer's on the internet, the keystroke logger would send information back to the manufacturer.
And it was supposed to be used for testing purposes.
Presumably it was to be used for testing
also could be used
purposes, right, but could be used, for nefarious reasons as well. So a lot of it is, do we test appropriately and at the appropriate level to make sure that there's no extra added functions that perhaps we've missed. There have been any number of stories that have come out that have been validated like that. But I don't know that we're systemically doing anything. I think it's really up to everybody in the supply chain to make sure that they're getting what it is they think they bought.
looking for additional questions in the final minutes we have. I do want to ask about intellectual property theft. Is it happening through cyber hacking, where ideas that are formulated by American companies, research bureaus, are being stolen by China and Russia? Is that happening?
Yes.
China.
Yeah.
China's really big on that,
Yeah.
yes.
China probably more than Russia, to the tune of several $100 billion a year.
Several $100 million a year?
Billion.
A year?
Billions.
There was just a Chinese national, I don't know if he's a national, at GE, that was just arrested for that.
Yes. There
General
was
Electric.
an aerospace theft, I think, that was going on, and I think it was related to GE.
Yeah.
That was more insider.
Yeah,
Yes, that was
That was
insider,
insider, right.
But when
Selling
it comes
to the Chinese?
to using the internet to do corporate intelligence work, or to look for this intellectual property, that's happening every day, every moment. And it's
Okay,
very
before I go
concerning.
back to the audience, Lisa, Ken Detzner is the Secretary of State?
Correct.
He is the person that all election supervisors then go to, am I correct?
Correct.
Does Secretary Dentzer call for a calibration, double check, examination of all 67 counties?
Well, each, part of our public inaccuracy testing, or logic inaccuracy, is the testing of the equipment to make sure it functions properly. When it is purchased, when we purchased it, every one of them was run through as if it was a real election. That we fed ballots through, that we programmed the express votes, that we voted ballots on, that it tabulated correctly. I mean, we do that, and every county by law is required to do that when they purchase new equipment. The state, at the state level, has to test and certify any voting equipment before Supervisor is allowed to purchase it.
Okay.
So right now, there are only 2 companies certified in the state of Florida.
Oh, boy. But you certify the election for this county, and then Secretary Dentzer certifies the election for the state?
Correct.
Okay. Back over here, sir. We have a couple of minutes left. Go ahead.
Jimmy Carter. I don't know if you all saw Liberty with Levine. He had George Gilmer on, and he was stating that the flow of currency in the world is so great that more fees are created by the transfer of currency than there are in the stock markets of the world, like 4 times the fees. And that's not going to be able to continue itself because of the cyber currency. So the cyber currency, we're up to $250 trillion American dollars out there, and there's no really foundation for that to go up or down, except if we need more money, we print more money. If we don't, we don't. But no one's going to go ask for China's money to be exchanged for ours, which is the big concern now. It's because he said everybody knows that China inflates whatever they make. Their numbers aren't real. And people believe that our numbers are more real to them. So he's predicting cyber currency take it over because there's no fees with cyber currency.
Any opinion on this, gentlemen? Because this is above my pay grade.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, and Levin didn't know what AI was, so I felt good coming here last time.
Okay.
I'm on top of him.
Thank you. Your question.
Hello, Jacob Broderick. I'm Homeland Security freshman. I understand that companies, they collect all of our data and they have all of our information, but is there any way to retrieve it again and make sure companies delete it, such as the GDPR's right to be forgotten? Do we see any possibility of that becoming policy in America in the recent future?
Probably not for a while. Yeah, in Europe you can do that. You have the right to be forgotten. So if you're a European Union citizen, based on the General Data Protection Regulation, you can say, Google, forget me. We can do the same thing here. We can say, Google, delete my account. Facebook, delete my account. Instagram, delete my account. That just means that we can't see it. Google, Facebook, and Instagram are still going to have our data, and they're still going to be using it.
Yeah, the other thing along those lines is what? Make sure your spouse or significant other has all your passwords so that in the event of somebody's untimely death, the account could be shut down, because an outside person can't shut down a Facebook account. Isn't that correct?
So I'll give a little plug again for LastPass, because it actually it actually has a countdown if somebody announces that you are deceased,
Yeah.
it will actually pass the information on to somebody that you name.
Really?
Correct.
Oh, there you go. Do we have anyone left? Did you have a second question?
No.
Okay, all right. Before we wrap up tonight, I want to let folks know, and I want to thank Bob Score for his work in capturing this on video. And Rob, thanks for being up there tonight, filling in for Tony Petro. And to Sundus and Diego, thank you for escorting our guest in tonight. When we come back on the 29th, the next event in the Embry-Riddle Speaker Series is... Thought we had this rehearsed, guys. Nope. There we go. The Venus Experience. Following our very successful Mars and Saturn experience, the words and music of Venus. I think you'll like it. There's a small band that will be playing, and then we'll have a discussion with our panel about Venus. Come with your questions. This is an excellent event for students. You'll see lots of pictures of what Venus looks like. That's coming up on October 29th here in the Embry-Riddle Speaker Series. Once again, I want to thank our panel, Dr. Gary Kessler, Dr. Philip Krager, Scott DeVault, and Lisa Lewis, the Supervisor of Elections for Volusia County. Thank you all for giving up part of your evening to be with us tonight. Thank you for coming. We'll see you in 2 weeks. Have a very pleasant ride home.